webinar is part of the California Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions KDA webinar series. This project is funded through a contract with the Department of Healthcare Services. Today's webinar is Implementing Effective Child and Family Teams. And just to remember that CFT meetings are an essential component of the team process. They provide a venue for families and team members to identify and prioritize concerns and challenges, brainstorm solutions, develop action plans, review what worked and what didn't work, and adjust the family's plan accordingly. Building on previous webinars in this series, which focused on preparing youth, caregivers, and professionals for participating in CFTs, this webinar addresses ways to enhance the effectiveness of the CFT meeting process. So before we begin, we have 3 polling questions which we'd like you to answer, and this helps us to get a better understanding of who is in our audience today. So the first question is, please tell us where you work. State or county child welfare, state or county behavioral mental health, a contract agency or CBO providing services, an education or training organization, or other. And people are voting. And we'll close the poll in just a second here. Okay, Katie, why don't we close the poll? So we have 22% are county and state or county child welfare, 37% are state or county behavioral mental health, 32% are contract agencies or CBOs providing services, 2% are education and training organizations, and 6% are other. Great, so we have a really broad audience today. So the next question is, please let us know the nature of your work. Do you work directly with children and families, a caseworker, clinician, wraparound facilitator? Are you a supervisor or a manager? Are you a family partner or a youth or peer provider? Are you a consultant, a trainer, or TA provider, or other? And people are voting right now. This is great. Okay, I think we'll close the poll. So almost half of you, 49%, work directly with children and families, 30% are supervisors or managers, 5% are family partners, youth, or peer provider, 7% are consultants, trainers, or TA providers, and 9% other. Great. Thank you for that. Okay, and we have one final polling question, which is, in your county or organization, do you have a specific model or approach for implementing child and family team meetings? Yes, no, or don't know? And we're almost done with the poll. Okay, we'll close the poll now. So 68% said yes, 14% said no, and 19% said don't know. Great, thank you. All right, so going on to the webinar today and the main content. So for our presentation today, we're pleased to welcome back San Diego and Tulare counties who were featured in our November webinar on preparing professionals for participating in child and family teams. Today, they'll be discussing the implementation of child and family team meetings. For this webinar, San Diego will begin with a general overview of issues and strategies related to implementing CFT meetings. Tulare will then have a few minutes to give their response and some feedback. And then Tulare will give some specific examples of CFT implementation for children and youth of different ages. And San Diego will give their response. And finally, we'll open up to questions from webinar participants. And we're planning on having, we hope, about 20 minutes to have questions from you. So with that, we're going to begin with San Diego County. And here are some bios of the participants today. Amanda Lance Sexton is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been actively involved in the San Diego County Children's System of Care for over 8 years. She has extensive background working with youth in the foster care system since 2001. She's been a key member of the core KDA implementation team in San Diego County since October 2013. We also have with us Stephen Wells. Stephen has worked in child welfare services for over 12 years, spending the first 8 years as a social worker serving the residential and medically fragile populations. He's been a supervisor for the past 4 years. Mr. Wells currently supervises the Child Welfare Services Pathway to Wellbeing Unit, which is tasked with the implementation of KDA recommendations in San Diego County. And finally, we have Sarah Potter, who is Executive Youth Partner of Family and Youth Roundtable in San Diego County, where she works to improve public child serving systems through advocacy and awareness. She spent 17 years in the foster care system and has earned her BA in social work from San Diego State and an MA in public policy and administration from Northwestern. Sarah has co-chaired San Diego's Children's System of Care Council and currently serves as a representative of youth involved with juvenile justice and residential treatment. So I'm going to turn this over to San Diego. Go ahead, San Diego.
Kim?
Go ahead.
Hi, Kim. Thank you. So this is Sarah Potter from San Diego, and I'd like to review our learning objectives before we move forward. So today we're hoping to help attendees understand the importance of authentic family youth engagement in implementation of a CFT meeting, help them learn practical strategies to structure a CFT meeting, strategies for handling CFT meeting challenges, and to also share the purpose and use of the progress summary and action plan as a tool for the CFT meetings. And those are 2 documents that we have worked together to create here in San Diego. So on the next slide, we are sharing our family youth professional partnership principles. Before we decided to implement the CFTs and we're reading through the core practice model, we went back to some of the tools and strategies that we've been using in our county already. Back in 2005, the 4 sectors of our Children's System of Care Council came together and drafted the Family Youth Professional Partnership Principles. These were adopted by BHS here in San Diego back in 2005 and have served as a roadmap for how we want to serve children, youth, and families, and what we are striving for. We found this to be particularly helpful as we moved away from agency-driven meetings, and we're moving more towards family and youth-driven meetings, such as CFTs. On the next slide is another tool that we utilized while implementing CFTs, and this is the ladder of authentic family and youth engagement. The top rung is family and youth systems equity, in which families, youth, and the professionals who serve them have shared decision-making power as well as shared investment in the outcome. We use this as a model with our providers and child welfare workers here in San Diego to have them aspire for the top rung, though we recognize that it's not possible in all systems or in all scenarios. But we want to aspire for the top rung and also encourage our child family serving systems to transcend the lower rungs and really try to embark on those that include active participation, which is what our CFTs are all about. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Wells, who is going to talk further about preparation for CFT meetings.
Thank you, Sarah. So this is Stephen Wells with Child Welfare Services. As we have worked on implementing the child and family team structure in San Diego County, what has become very apparent to us is that probably the most important part of the child and family team process and also the meeting process is the value of preparation. So a great majority of the good work and the best practice actually happens before the meeting is ever convened or called. So with the preparation, we are having our care coordinators meet with all of the family members, particularly the youth, and really doing a very good job of taking a look at what are the youth and families' priorities, what do they want to see accomplished in the meeting, what will it take for them to feel safe and validated, and what would help them to feel like active contributors to the meeting. It's one thing to tell a youth and family that the meeting is about them. It's another to really go the extra mile and show them through the way that we engage them that that is the priority that we will hold before, during, and after the meeting. Preparation provides the opportunity for youth and family to express whatever their needs are so that those can make sure to get surfaced during the meeting, any hopes that they have or any worries that they have about how the child and family team is going to function, what's going to happen during the meeting. And we also spend a lot of time differentiating child and family team meetings from other types of meetings that youth and family attend, such as TDMs, treatment team meetings, and other types of family-involved meetings. So they have a lot of questions about how it's going to be the same, what's going to happen, and how it may differ from other types of meetings they attend. The facilitator is able to gain insight about how they can support the youth. The youth is able to talk about maybe some group agreements that will help them to feel safe and help them to feel like their voice is heard, and the facilitator can take that preparatory conversation and kind of incorporate that in their facilitation of the meetings as a gesture towards the youth that they've been listened to, and that the facilitator will help them to move along the meeting in a way that feels safe and productive for them. The facilitator through these preparatory meetings also is able to gain a good sort of roadmap about what the meeting may look like, what the priorities of the members might be, and what to look out for as a facilitator. It helps to prime the meeting so that not all of those things are having to be uncovered or surfaced during the meeting, that it actually helps the meeting move along quicker because everybody's priorities have already been discussed. Next slide. So we are very proud of our child and family team meeting structure that we've been able to develop. This is a structure that just helps the facilitators make sure that they have a little bit of an outline or a script about how an ideal child and family team meeting will progress. It starts with a series of pretty robust introductions. It is certainly an introduction with name and title, but it goes way deeper than that. And the introduction process helps to also uncover other resources that people, professionals, family, and youth bring to the room. So one of the practices that we put in place is actually an exploration of what we call expertise. So when the team introduces themselves, they introduce their name, their role, but then also something about themselves or a skill that they have that's not related to their professional role that may be a resource to the team. For example, if one of the team members is an accountant or a CPA, they may be able, and the issue in the team is doing taxes or finances, they may be able to lend some expertise that isn't related to their professional role that may benefit the youth, family, and the team. We spend a lot of time talking about group agreements, which is really important in terms of building a culture within the group and making sure that the youth and the family feel safe, heard, and validated at all times. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of explaining the culture of the group and the priorities of the group during that time. Finally, we go to identifying the situation. That starts with the youth. The youth lets us know what their intended goal for the meeting and also for the overall purpose of the team, and the team adopts that as the purpose of the team, and that is the foundation for all work that the team does from there on out. In the next slide, please. In the assessing of the situation, there is a robust discussion of strengths. And strengths are not necessarily just likes or hobbies, but those are things that the youth or the family has in their lives that can be built upon or enhanced as things that they can draw upon to solve their own concerns, or might be coping strategies or resiliency factors when things get a little bit tough for the youth or the family. Instead of talking about behaviors or just those surface level concerns, we really want to talk about what are the underlying needs that may be driving behaviors or concerns, and really focusing on action planning around those needs. The important part of the meeting is discussing the current services that are involved with the family, and really having a really honest discussion about whether those services are meeting the needs of the youth. Sometimes just because services are offered does not necessarily mean that it's targeting or is the most effective intervention to help resolve those worries. So we take a look at what help are we providing? Is it helping? If not, are there some adjustments that need to be made? Or do we need to look at providing another formal or informal service? So finally, there's a period of brainstorming and reaching a decision. We come up with the action plan, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then there's a process of scaling where the youth and family are given an opportunity to talk about whether they felt their voice was heard. So that is a little bit more about the meeting structure. That's one of the attachments that is given for today's webinar. So please feel free to refer to that on an ongoing basis. So please, next slide. Next slide, please. All right, so talking a little bit about setting the meeting agenda. As I mentioned before, the youth is asked to set their intended goal. The team is also able to share any worries or needs they have in regards to what the agenda is that the youth would like to have set. The team decides on a common goal and a purpose of the meeting. And really the important part about goal setting is that if there are any worries or concerns or additions that the team would like to have for the intended agenda for the meetings, that just gets surfaced in the team discussion. We really encourage a lot of transparency and communication, and that is the facilitator's role to elicit that conversation, and so that the group can make sure to get all the needs out on the table and decide on a common purpose. And then the agenda makes sure to address any issues of monitoring and adapting action plan to come up with any good solutions or discussions towards the intended goal for the child and family team. Next slide. Tips for successful engagement, like we talked a little bit about preparation. That's very important. We discussed the sharing of expertise. Leaving titles at the door is very important because that is our way of controlling for power dynamics between professionals and the family and just trying to equalize the playing field during the meeting. However, I always like to say that the power associated with the title gets left at the door, but whatever resources that title brings are definitely a resource that the group can use. And again, setting the group agreements and allowing the youth to set the agenda really helps to keep the youth voice in the room. Next slide. The one point on this slide, the other ones we've talked about, but the one point on this slide that I think is very important is expanding conversations beyond no. A lot of times the youth will talk about a need or a priority and will come up with their idea of what they would like to see happen. Oftentimes when adults become worried about that, the conversation ends very abruptly with kind of a no, or that's not possible. But we just want to make sure to really have a good discussion with the youth about what our worries are and what the potential obstacles are, because that becomes a critical thinking exercise for the youth so that they can think through the plan and think through why something may not be possible, because we need to make sure to model that problem solving and critical thinking process for the youth. And sometimes we find ourselves surprised that actually they've thought through things a little better than what we originally had thought, and they've actually come up with a really good solution, and then that becomes the solution that the team uses. So really making sure that we don't shut down conversation prematurely and allow the youth a chance for that process and thinking. So with that, I am going to pass over the presentation to Amanda.
Hi, this is Amanda from Behavioral Health Services in San Diego. Thanks, Stephen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some challenges that might surface while you are engaging in the preparation phase of the child and family team meeting. One of the bigger ones that we've talked about in our county more recently is engaging youth, and in particular the transitional age youth population. Some of our challenges are even the mention of biofamily or bringing biofamily into the meeting as we're sort of defining what is family. That can be a huge trigger for some of our TAY youth, for our youth across the board, but in particular we want to be sensitive, along with the fact that there's a developmental process happening for our TAY youth that really actually works against some of what we're trying to do in teaming. The whole process of adolescence is really about individuation and separation, and when you have been a part of the dependency system and haven't had the ability to really push back against someone, while we're trying to form that team for this youth, there may be some pretty heavy pushback, and just for us to realize as providers that that doesn't mean that the team shouldn't form, that we also need to rely on interdependence within our system, and that we can still respect that independence, and how can you be independently interdependent upon your team. And also thinking about our language, so languaging the child and family team. A lot of times using the word child with a transitional age youth is not always user-friendly, so we want to think about that as well. Another challenge we've experienced is just team members with differing goals for the youth. So, for example, we may have a youth that's in foster care, in conflict. There's conflict between the foster family and the biological family and what the needs are. There may also be the challenge of the youth selection of teams. So the youth is ultimately at the center of this process. And what if the youth doesn't want someone there that's really a key player, a key component, and how do we manage that? And then the fourth dot point is connecting with professional team members. So how are we, as the team members, connecting with one another in between the actual meeting process? Next slide, please. So here's some ideas for how to manage some of these challenges that have come up. So for our transitional age youth, ultimately for all of our youth, we should be having a discussion about how do we make this meeting, how do we make this team a good fit. If the youth is resistant, then have possibly the youth in that preparation phase have a voice. We always want them to have that voice. And if they're not even receptive to attending the meeting at first, maybe someone else could be the spokesperson for the youth. So we can get their voice in a room and really have them script it. And what we often find is that once they start scripting what they really want to say, they do want to be present because they realize that this meeting has become about them. It's no longer about the providers telling them what to do or how things are going. And when they realize that voice is going to be in the center, they want to be there and they want to see that part. Even if maybe the first part of the meeting they're sitting there not participating, they're going to want to speak up at some point. That's been our experience. The second dot point is really, going back to that conflict of team members with differing goals. Having that broader goal for the youth and the family needs to be made aware of ahead of time. So there are there's transparency across the board. There's no hidden agendas. If there's a permanency plan in place or there's reunification plan in place, all team members need to be aware of that and sort of geared towards that same ultimate goal for the youth. So if there's a foster family that's sort of at odds with the bio family and the foster family is really wanting possibly to have a longer-term relationship with this youth and maybe even adopt, but right now there's still a reunification plan in place, then that really needs to be delicately dealt with in the preparation phase so that there isn't a setup going into the team meeting where the bio family and the foster family are at odds. The third dot point goes back to the youth selection of teams. We always want to make sure that the youth voice is at the center of the team selection. So and we also want to remind team members or potential team members that if they aren't included, and we've had this happen at times, there are obviously certain members we need to have present. But if there are other members that want to be a part of it and the youth has not invited them or specifically has said, I'm not ready to have that person there, how can we integrate that person's voice still into the teaming process? So just because you're not necessarily present at the team meeting, you can still have a voice, and that facilitator, the ICC, the care coordinator, can still take the information that you have, and we would say that the information that all team members have whether they're present at the meeting or not, is valuable. And so to make sure that we get that team member can still be a part of the team without necessarily being present at the meeting. And the fourth dot point is really discussing how are we connecting when we're not in that meeting, and how do we have access to one another, and that we want to make sure that we're discussing alternative modes of communication and a very firm, solid agreement about how team members are communicating when they're not actually having the CFT meeting. And this seems so basic, and oftentimes when I'm training this, in our one-day training that we're doing in San Diego County right now, it seems so elementary that, hey, you're going to return your phone call within a certain amount of time. But honestly, these are the snafus that are catching our providers and some of our other team members off guard. What do I do when I don't receive a call back? And so making sure that, again, this is an overt process that's discussed during, agenda setting, during team agreements, during that initial meeting, and during the preparation phase. Next slide, please. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the difficult conversations that are often coming up for us in the child and family team meetings, and how some strategies to help you through managing those as well. The first bullet point just discussed a little bit about limit setting with team members. This would be off-topic conversation, negativity, just general inappropriateness. The second dot point is about youth and family resistance to services or supports that are being offered during the teaming or the meeting process. This could be traditional or non-traditional supports. And the third dot point mentions that all team members need to be actively participating in action steps on the action plan. However, what happens when that's not necessarily happening the way that the team envisioned it? Next slide, please. So one of the ways to combat limit setting with team members in a meeting is really to have some overt conversations going back to that preparation and that initial team building in that first meeting about meeting structure and how to manage derailing of meeting goals. So these conversations may look as overt as saying, if someone gets off topic, here's how we're going to handle it. Hey, or if you know one team member, you have a certain relationship with them, saying ahead of time, hey, if you catch me talking about this, because sometimes I go there, can you kick me or just give me a hand signal to let me know, cut it, we'll talk about it later. And then also recognizing that there's a time and a place for certain discussions, and it's possible that the team meeting is not necessarily the place for it, and giving each other permission to say, if I go in a direction where the team is not necessarily headed, go ahead and call me out on that, and we can talk about that later. So being very overt about it. And again, sometimes we make assumptions that these are givens and that this is going to happen no matter what. But it really does need to be an overt, agreed upon process, because if not everybody's on the same page, that's really where we see the biggest challenges coming up. The second dot point refers to that resistance of support services or mandated services during the meeting. And so really maintaining a space of inquiry. So if we have a youth or a family that's resistant to something that's being offered, oftentimes as professionals we want to jump in and sort of say, well, we know what's best. We know about the service, and this is going to help. But really remaining in that space of inquiry to allow the youth and the family to have that voice to let us know what is or isn't working for them. Because we may see a service as idyllic and, oh, this is going to be great for you, but we are not actually in that process. And again, we always want to remember that our families and our youth are their own experts. They know themselves way better than we could ever know them, and so allowing them to maintain that space of inquiry. And also discussing what are the other possibilities, because sometimes we think this is the only possibility, and as soon as we give them that voice, we realize there are so many other options that are yet uncovered. So moving on to the third dot point, that all team members actively participate. And so the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about accountability, but accountability is definitely established early in the group agreement. So everyone is going to be participating. And the way that we specifically do that, and to ensure that that's happening, is by using our progress summary and action plan as a means of accountability. Next slide, please. So we also have given this as a handout. It should have been attached to the PowerPoint, or else you'll be receiving it shortly after the webinar today. The Progress Summary and Action Plan is the document that we utilize at every child and family team meeting. And so it is typically being completed by a professional member of the team. And it ultimately, if you take a look at it, it leads you through the steps to make sure that there's always going to be a review of the services that are currently happening, services that are recommended, and that this is reviewed by the entire team and that everybody has a say in that process. And then below the existing supports and services column, there's actually an area about what needs to happen. So there's an active dialogue among team members, and then it's documented about what needs to happen for this team to move forward to assist and support the youth, and who is going to do it. And so this is going to help us track who's doing what. And ultimately, we want all of the team members to participate, and no matter how big or small the task is, we want to really see everybody's name. And a lot of times I think I've heard from child welfare in the past that at PDMs or other meetings, it really has fallen on the child welfare worker. Okay, they're going to do this and do that, and worker will do this, you know, and it'll be 10 steps later, and the worker has 10 new assignments. And this is not at all that. This is not at all like that. This is really about every member of this team stepping in and doing what Stephen was talking about, stepping into their strengths, so that they can really assist in supporting the child and the family through this process. Stephen?
Yeah, this is Stephen. I just wanted to add very quickly that I think the sharing of the responsibility of the tasks for the action plan is an antidote to any concerns of the social worker or the facilitator of the meeting that this is a workload impact for them, because even though initially the preparation aspect and the teaming and getting everybody to the table, although that is a labor-intensive task, once the more you're able to involve natural supports in the team, that's more hands on deck to help accomplish what needs to be accomplished in the action plan. So oftentimes we find that when we bring natural supports to the table, there's a great deal of resource within the family, time, money, effort, passion, whatever that resource needs to be, and we can enlist those natural supports to help us with what was always traditionally more of a professional, what felt like more of a professional responsibility.
And this is Sarah. I want to add as well, I know that Amanda briefly talked about some of the difficulty in engaging the transition age youth who maybe are a little bit more hesitant to engage with another team or participate in another meeting, and it might be a little bit burnt out. And one of the things that we found helpful as well, especially with that population, is when we have, when we use the progress summary and action plan, is really making sure that the youth gets a lot of tasks assigned to them that they can complete on their own. And I think it not only helps them get prepared for independence, but it also makes them feel like they do have a sense of autonomy throughout the CFT process and that their voice and choice is being heard.
Great, thank you both. And yeah, so that's a great point, is that, you know, that's that whole interdependence on the team that we're hoping that we get out of the transitional age youth in their engagement in the meeting. That we really do want them to be engaged and buying into the process in order for it to be successful. So on that second page of the progress summary and action plan, there's also some scaling activities that typically the facilitator would do with the group, just to keep that dialogue open about, you know, did I have input during the meeting? Was my input listened to and valued? Was I part of the plan, and am I supporting this plan? And making sure that everybody's engaging in that dialogue, and that's part of one of our main key functions of the facilitator to ensure that that's happening. And then at the end, there's a list of all of the CFT members and contact information, and all of the members participating in the team meeting will get a copy of this plan after the meeting. So everyone is going to be on the same page about what's going to happen next and when it's going to happen by, and then typically they'll also plan for the next meeting and document that on this sheet as well. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up for us for San Diego. And so we'll go ahead and kind of move it over to Tulare and see if they have any response for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It was a really great, really informative overview. So I am going to introduce our Tulare County panel, and then they're going to give some feedback to San Diego. So we have Tim Zavala, who is a licensed clinical social worker. Tim has worked at Tulare Youth Services Bureau, or TYSB, for the past 16 years, and he's currently the clinical director. He oversees the various specialty mental health services provided by TYSB, including a countywide sexual abuse treatment program, a parent-child interaction therapy program, and an equine facilitated psychotherapy program, and the Pathways to Wellbeing program. Melia Mahfoud-Staggs is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been working with children and families at GYSB for 3 years. For the past year, she has been facilitating CFT meetings across the county, assisting high-needs families with accessing more supportive services. And finally, we have Sandra Ruiz, MA, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and is also the full-service partnership program manager at Tulare Youth Service Bureau. Sandra is responsible for facilitating child and family team meetings and supervises the provision of intensive home-based services, or IHBS, through Tulare County. So do you want to go ahead and give some feedback for San Diego?
Sure. This is Tim Zavala. And, you know, we don't have a lot of feedback. I just want to say I really appreciate the time and the effort that San Diego's team has put into such a strong training component for providers. It's so well thought out and structured, and it's just great. I appreciate the strong foundation and the underlying philosophy that they built on of authentic family and youth engagement. One of our challenges in Tulare has been enlisting parent and youth partners in the planning and development process. I think we're doing well in engaging them in the CFTs and beyond, but it's been a bit of a challenge because I know that many counties are utilizing wrap providers for these services, and parent and youth partners were embedded in that system. And so we were not wrap providers, so that was a new thing for us. And I just appreciate that San Diego has highlighted the importance of that, and we've taken cues on that and are working toward implementing parent and youth partners in the planning and development as we continue to develop the program here. Do you have any?
Yeah. This is Melia. I have a kind of a response to something that San Diego had said that made me think of something. In my experience in conducting and facilitating CFT meetings, I haven't come across an issue with a client or a child not wanting a specific person invited to the meeting. And I think that's because we just asked the youth or child, who they'd like at the meeting. And I think that if we really feel strongly as a team that someone should have been there, that the child does not want there, instead of going and talking to that person on your own or just getting information from that person on your own, I would think it'd be a valuable component to your plan of care and add it there. So a goal would be, for example, if the child didn't want his bio mother there, I would add it on the plan of care as a goal, like child to explore a relationship with mother, and then intervention would be child to discuss this in therapy with therapists, and then the people responsible would be then the therapist and, of course, the child. And so I would work it that way so the child's voice or youth's voice can really be heard and respected and supported during the CFT process, because the more voices in a room can be overwhelming, I've noticed, for the client, and so we really wanted to support him or her in making that decision on who's there.
Can I respond to that? This is Amanda from San Diego. Thank you. And I don't know if I'm supposed to respond to your response, but I love your point. I think that that's actually very, very well said, and I agree it should be. And the example that actually came up for us was with, a youth that was given like a 30-day notice from a housing facility, and the housing person really wants to be involved in the meeting, but the youth is really not wanting that person involved at that point. So it may not go on the plan that that person will ever be involved, but how do we get that information that that housing case manager or housing specialist has? So thinking about it sort of from that perspective, sort of the longer-term relationships versus a relationship that may be at its ending point because of circumstances as well. So thank you for that.
And that can also be built into the agreements of the team, which is, having a transparent discussion of, you said that you didn't want your housing provider to be at the meeting. However, some of this information is really important for them to have to care for you and to do what they need to. So how do we want to handle that? And how do we want to, handle the discussion of communication of important information to people who are not on the team while also still respecting privacy of the content? How do we relay that to them without violating the privacy of the meeting?
Thank you.
Thanks. So I think we're ready for our presentation. This is Tim Zavala again, and you can go to the next slide. So You're not going to have to hear me too much. I have an administrator's perspective on all of this, and so really it's going to be Melia and Sandra who are going to be doing the majority of this webinar for us because they have the experience actually coordinating and conducting the CFTs. But I just wanted to start by saying how important coordination is and making sure that we're getting everybody there that needs to. So, of course, you have to have the clinician, you have to have the consumer and the CWS social worker, and then beyond that, immediate family members, everybody that you all have just been talking about that the consumer wants to be there. It could be their IHBS worker who's working intensely with them in the home if they're available, and then additional people would be maybe a probation officer, a teacher, their CASA, extended family members, and any other community supports. I think that eventually, like I was saying before, we would love to add a parent or youth partner in the process, and so this would be a great place for them to come in too. So that's a lot of people, and I think that coordinating the meetings is actually one of the biggest challenges that we've had because when a child is referred into the program, we're then immediately on a time limit. We've got 2 weeks to coordinate and conduct the CFT, and so what we did is we designated a clerical support staff to assist with that. She is extremely organized person and emails and calls and make sure that everybody can be there at the designated time within that time frame, and it's been working really well for us. Still occasionally, somebody does cancel last minute. With regard to if it's a social worker and they can't make it, then we have a great relationship with CWS, and we can call and they'll send somebody else over so that we can have the CFT. So that's how we have worked on coordination.
Next slide. This is Sandra Ruiz, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual format, so what it looks like when we have our CFT meetings. So this is very important for us. We really want to take in consideration the age of the child. We work with the variety. We have 3-year-olds all the way to 18-year-olds. So depending on the age, we assess what's the appropriateness of that child to be present. We've had sessions. I've had the experience of having CFT meetings in which we have a 3-year-old and the sibling, and they're running around playing. We do provide toys. We have things for them in order for them to be available and be present. We do want to honor their voice and their opinion, even though they're still young. We do want to have them to be present for at least a small period of time. And if we determine that that's really difficult and that we need to talk about something that may not be very appropriate for them to be present, then at that point we have a case manager or maybe the IHBS worker that is working with the child, and then do some work aside and working with them while we continue with the meeting. So we evaluate. We've had kids that have been there, they're 3-year-olds and there for the hour and a half that or the hour or 30 minutes that depending on the time that we are available for that child. So that's the first component. The second one is as the facilitator, we're assessing, like I said, if they need to be there. We make sure that we introduce everybody to the table, and we initiate by, if this isn't a first contact, this is a first referral for our program, we provide some information about the KDA, and now it's called Intensive Care Coordinator Services. So we do let the family know what this program entitles, what do we need to do, which is provide intensive services. The child is entitled to receive that, whether it's the meetings that we have to have every 90 days, or add additional support in the home or the school, and in addition to all of the services that we provide here, which is the collateral therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, group, and psychiatric services. Next slide, please. Then we continue with, we're strength-based, so we really want to make sure that we start with what's working for the family, what's working for the child, what's going well, whether it's at school, at home, in the community, what are the coping skills that he has, what's the support system, and what are his likes. Those are valuable. We really want to honor that because those can be used as coping skills. Then we continue in our plan by facilitating the family strength. So what is the family? So this is for the child. The next one is for the family. So what's working for the family? Well, they're open to treatment. They're consistent to the therapy appointments. They're available to take them to different community. Something in the community. It could be the Boys and Girls Club or something. So all of that we noted in our service plan. Then we want to honor everybody's opinion. So we ask questions. Everybody needs to share some of the information. And the next point that we discuss in our meeting is what is the goal and what's the need. So what's the situation, what's the concern, and that goes into the behaviors or the symptoms or whatever's happening. So we really want to emphasize. Let's start with the positives, and then we move to the concerns. And we really want to emphasize that everybody shares what's working, what's not working, and with the concerns. So we do kind of go around the table and make sure that everybody is sharing that information. And then I will pass this presentation to Amelia. Okay, hello. So just going on with our agenda, we continue to identify interventions that be helpful in meeting goals and needs. And then we figure out who is responsible. Is it the therapist? Is it the social worker? Is it the foster parent? Is it the client? Especially as San Diego mentioned, the teens really need to start taking responsibility for things that they can do on their own. And then going on, next slide, thank you. Then the coordinator wraps up the meeting by identifying dates in which each goal can be met and clarifying if we need more assistance in meeting that goal. And then if this is the follow-up CFT, we review the past plan of care and see what's different, what has been changed, what progress has been made as well. And just my overall tip for CFT meetings, because we just gave you a lot of information on how we do a meeting, is this balance of structure and flexibility. Because it was so hard to coordinate this meeting with 8 different people and get everybody there. And so we just don't want it to lose its structure, to not get done what it needed to get done. And so being an ICC facilitator, I have a real challenge of letting everyone's voice be heard and valued and validated, and then also having to cut people off at times and go, okay, if this pertains, let's continue on with the plan. That sounds like something you can discuss in therapy, or that's something you and your social worker can work out after the meeting. Really just being flexible, because I've had some meetings go 20 minutes, and then I've had some meetings go an hour and a half. So this balance of what does the family need within the structure of a CFT, but also being flexible and helping everyone be validated and heard. And then Sandra will give you a plan of care on how we do that. So this is an example of what we have as a child family team meeting, and we get this one from the wraparound component. So on the top you see all of the agencies that provide services, and we have the child's name, the consumer name, date of birth, all the basic stuff, and then the sign-in sheet. Next slide, please. At this point, I really want to emphasize that we want to identify like the family vision statement, and it's really complicated. I mean, this is hard for a lot of families. You know, what's the vision? What do you want to accomplish overall? So it could take a little bit of a discussion trying to figure out. So it's just an example of how we document all of that information. And some families really struggle identifying that specific vision, and some they're really good, and this is what we want. So this is, like I said, just a specific example. So there's different domains that we look into. Typically, for the agency and the clientele that we're working with, which is the foster care kids, there's only a few that we really focus on: the safety, the family, the emotional, the school. There's really not a lot on on that we emphasize on money, housing, or health, or work, cultural. This is just, like I said, it's just an example, but we focus on whatever the child needs. This example shows the safety, which is for this child, this is a 3-year-old, and we had a big group of people attending this meeting. We had the clinician, we had the social worker, we had the FFA worker, the foster parent, the child, and we had the wraparound team that was also working with this child. So the boundaries, so we really address each component. The family, I'm sorry, the number 1 was the safety. Number 4 was emotional. Number 5, the school, and 2 again, family. So what was the situation? Then the actions. So what are the interventions? What do we need to accomplish? And each one, as you can see, healthy boundaries with strangers and community, impulse control, and who's responsible for that, and all the strengths, and the date when we met and discussed this, and then when we're going to meet again. So that's another, important component. Like Milia said, trying to figure out when is going to be our next meeting. Next slide, please. So this is a continuation of that same format. So if we have more to discuss, we'll just add to that. Next slide. And this last one shows, what is the family strength. So this is when we document, all of the strengths the family has to offer for the family. We really want to emphasize that overall, we do review. We meet with those clients every so often. Would depend on what the family needs, whether they want to meet every month, every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, every 90 days. And at that point, we evaluate whether those goals were met or not met, or we need to address something different. And as we continue to see progress, our goal is to, move them to a lower level of care, so eventually they don't have to have all the services, and they will be doing good, and we'll move them to just regular therapy, meet with for individual or family, and depending what the need is. So here's an example of how we document a meeting. This is the example of a 4-year-old that actually, with the IO parents and the social worker was present. So the top portion is, who was present for the meeting, where the meeting was held, and what's the purpose of the meeting. The second part is the outcome of the session. So it's basically what happened in the meeting, who reported what, and what's our plan, and what's going to be, what do the whole team agree to accomplish for that meeting. And then the third component is the plan. So our next meeting will be in 60 days. Hi, this is Milia again. So the documenting a CFT meeting that Sandra has up, and then I also have up on the next slide, these are actual notes, progress notes that we wrote to document our CFT meetings. So feel free to read them, explore different writing styles. But the main point about mine is that it was a case of a 15-year-old female in foster care who was also on probation. And so while our probation officer wasn't able to attend the CFT meeting, she was still there, her therapist was there, her social worker, or the CDOS supervisor was there since her social worker couldn't make it, her foster mother and RAP coordinator was there. And as a 15-year-old who's on probation, she was really having trouble accepting responsibility for some of her actions. Her therapist said that she was missing about half of her therapy sessions with her, and the foster mother said she has a bus pass, she knows how to get to her appointments, she knows the time of her appointments, and this is on her. And so it was a great discussion during the CFT of how we can support this 15-year-old female in taking responsibility for actions, figuring out what actually helps her, what doesn't help her, and what she wants. And so the plan of care was great in identifying a family vision. And for this girl, her vision was to complete probation requirements so she can be done with that. It was a thorn in her side, and she was embarrassed about it. And so that was a great launching pad for the rest of us to go, great, how can we help you with that? And her RAP coordinator stepped up and said, you know what, I will take you, or her RAP supporter said, I will take you to half your therapy appointments because mental health services was part of her probation requirements. And then this teenager said, okay, if you get me to half, so I don't have to take the bus, I'm willing to take the bus, for the other half. And so they were able to work together and take responsibility for that. She was even able to admit that therapy was helpful for her at this time. She just would rather hang out with her friends. But hanging out with her friends, she was able to realize during the CFT meeting, isn't conducive to her meeting her probation requirements. And so it was a really neat CFT meeting to coordinate, where I could just see the wheels turning and people really stepping up on how to help her. So you can go ahead and read this note on your own time, but I just wanted to review on how valuable these CFT meetings and having all the voices heard and all the supporters and knowing what works and what doesn't work for a youth or child can really be helpful. Next slide, please. And so this is just kind of a recap, this slide, of what we do. We use the Plan of Care Guide, which we mentioned in the last webinar if you participate in, that it's a work in progress. We're still working with Tulare County and creating one that truly best fits the needs of our clients, but we use that as our plan. We use it as our structure when we're conducting a CFT meeting. And then just a reminder that a separate CFT meeting is conducted for each child, including siblings. But in my experience, I have had siblings who both needed CFT meetings together in a meeting. They were both okay with that. You know, you always check with the client, the child, if it's okay, and then you just conduct separate plans for each child, and then they would sign the separate plans. So that's how you would do that. So thank you, Jim or Sandra. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Tulare. So San Diego, do you want to give some feedback to that?
This is Stephen. I just wanted to point out that it just was, it struck me that some of the challenges of facilitation are consistent in Tulare as they are in San Diego in terms of, I think, just how nimble the facilitator needs to be in terms of facilitating the meetings, that there's so many priorities that have to be accounted for, and really it sounds like you're doing a really great job of really keeping the youth and family and just at the forefront of your mind and trying to keep that at the forefront of facilitation, while also really trying to make sure to keep all of the team members engaged and make sure that everybody's perspective is welcome and a part of the meeting. And I just think that that's a really unique skill that is difficult to master. So it sounds like you're having a lot of the same challenges, but also successes that I think facilitators of child and family teams throughout the state are probably having. And I think I noticed something on, I think it was the Plan of Care towards the top that said family vision, and I really like that concept. I think the concept of vision is, that's just a really great sort of strength-based way to say, like, where do you want to go? What is your sort of end goal, without necessarily calling it a goal, but just having a vision, I think, is just a really really warm way to get at the family's priorities. So I think that that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sarah. So great presentation. I share the same sentiment that Stephen just shared about the vision. I think that's a really wonderful idea, and I think that we're going to look at how we can incorporate that as well. And in reviewing the child and family team plan and just your overall CFT structure, I'm kind of curious, what is your process for incorporating informal supports and non-traditional treatments like sports and other community interventions? Do you have a process in place for that, and what does that look like?
This is Sandra Ruiz, and yes, actually the example that I have on my progress note, the IHBS worker plays a big role in that situation. They're the ones that, you know, aside from providing whatever behavioral support they need, they're also linking them to community services. So if there is a need, we do add that information to the service, to the CFT plan, and the IHB worker is the one that will help the family link for services, whether it's sport or the Boys and Girls Club or a gym membership, or, you know, whatever the situation might be. They're the main person, the contact person that will be supporting the child and the family to access those services.
Great, thank you. Was there any other feedback that you had in San Diego?
The only other thing, this is Amanda, and I also want to just compliment you on your overall presentation and the way that it was structured, and again, that vision. I think that that's something we were listening, and the three of us all agreed that that's something we need to make sure that we're implementing. And that word vision in general is just, it really struck all of us. We were a little bit curious about just sort of getting the perspective of the youth and family on their strengths, because one of the things we've tried to veer away from with our providers who are currently practicing out there is not just looking at strengths as, oh, the client attends session every week. Oh, the client is going to appointments as necessary. Though those are strengths, we're really trying to look at resiliencies as well and sort of on a broader perspective. And we noticed in your planning it was more sort of those traditional behaviorally focused strengths that we've seen in our behavioral health plan as well. And just wondering how you're integrating in sort of more of a broad view of strengths, and are your families receptive to that? Because we're finding that our families are much more receptive to us languaging it a little bit different than that traditional model.
This is Sandra again. Yes, yeah, you're right. Definitely that's something that it's we really need to focus and make sure that we're getting that more specific information. That's definitely something that we can improve. There's always room for improvement, and sometimes it's challenging, and there's a lot of people in that meeting, and it's hard to get the input and make sure that we're on time and we're not going over in time. So that's definitely something that the Tulare County can improve.
All right, great, thank you. So we're going to now open it up to questions from the audience, and we're entertaining questions from any topic or slide or information that was in the entire slideshow. So remember that to ask a question, you can just type it into the question box, and Katie will read it. We actually already had a few questions early this week that we went ahead and forwarded to the presenters. So Katie, why don't you go ahead and start?
The first question is, how do you balance family-driven with court and CPS mandates?
Okay, this is Stephen from San Diego. My first impression when I read this question was that, as we discussed earlier in our presentation, transparency about sort of realities of the case and in discussing it in the child and family team, I think are really important. I think if there are court orders or if there are CWS mandates or if there are sort of either non-negotiables or things that exist outside of the team that the team needs to be aware of, I think that just becomes a part of the conversation. And if there are court orders that need to be considered, that is something that the team gets to consider and gets to either plan for or plan how to accommodate those things within the team. But the team also has valuable feedback that can be taken back to court potentially if there are realities that the team uncovers that the court needs to be aware of that may influence court orders or practices. I think that influence can go both ways. That's a two-way street. So if there's something that's uncovered in the team that the court can consider in maybe making future orders or amendments to orders, I think that that's fair game as well.
And this is Tim in Tulare. What I would add to that is I think a lot of times it's the relationship between the CWS worker and the therapist that's really important with regard to everybody knowing what the court mandates are probably prior to the CFT, and then just checking with the client and the parent and making sure that they understand the mandates and the timelines with regard to the court and their CWS case plan. And then for sure, like Steve was saying, incorporating that into the CFT if necessary, and making sure that everybody understands, and that how can we meet all of our goals that we're talking about within the time frame that is that the court is presenting. So I think that the relationship with CWS is really key in making that happen.
All right. The next
Katie, you want to read the next question?
Yeah, next question is, how do you deal with disagreement between team members over action steps? For example, several members of the team want to use flex funds to help the foster mother buy a car, and one member thinks it is not a good idea for some reason, maybe because the foster mom needs to learn to budget better. So it's how to deal with the disagreement between team members over action steps.
So this is Stephen from San Diego. Yeah, flex funds are definitely a topic that I think gets brought up a lot, and you know, without knowing the specifics of the situation, how to kind of solve that particular concern, because it sounds like that has come up at a particular meeting or in a handful of meetings. I think a lot of it just has to do with understanding that agenda items may not be each person in the team's first choice. It may not be everybody's kind of plan A. We use something called gradients of agreement here, which it isn't a yes or no agreement model. It's a model that is a kind of a 1 through 5 scale that goes all the way from I love it, I wouldn't change anything about it, all the way to no way, no how, what we call the veto. And so a lot of it is just kind of expanding disagreement and making sure that while it may not be somebody's first choice in terms of what's decided, we may not ask for 100% agreement, but what we would ask is that for any decision to be made, that if it's not somebody's first choice, that we actually just reach a place where somebody can agree to support the plan versus having full agreement. So I think expanding the agreement conversation past a binary yes or no type of model, I think just helps us to get a little bit more consensus, and then it also helps to understand, and we ask certainly in a true scaling fashion, what would it take you? What would it take for you to get to a place of support? And then hopefully we can reach a little bit more consensus that way.
Thank you.
All right, the next question is do you bill Medi-Cal for the preparatory meetings? If so, how do you do that? If not, why not?
This is Amanda from San Diego. Yes, so Code 82 is actually a case management billing code, and so our providers outside of lockout situations can bill Code 82 for preparation and team building and all of that preparation that happens before the initial meeting without issue.
And for us in Tulare, preparation for the CFT, we wrap that into our CFT meeting time. And that's how we bill for it, because we're billing the 107 code for CFT meetings, ICC coordination, and the preparation part for us is part of that. And so that's just how we do it. And then if it's prepping the client and family, then a therapist does that, and the client's individual mental health sessions or family sessions with the therapist, and the therapist would bill that within their therapy session time.
Thank you.
The next question is, there's a lot of similarities, such as keeping the voice of the child at the center, emphasis on collaboration, etc., with the formats utilized for wraparound child and family team meetings, except wraparound provides more extensive services, perhaps with a broader scope. Would it be safe to say that when a youth is receiving wraparound services, the KDA services should not overlap? Can you speak a bit about this?
This is Stephen from San Diego. I think the difference, and I'll also defer to my partners here in Tulare, but for me the difference between WRAP services and child and family team meetings is WRAP is a service. It is a, you know, we refer to WRAP and WRAP has goals, and WRAP is an intervention versus child and family teams are a way to discuss interventions, and it's a way to host a conversation about services. You know, WRAP philosophy is a kind of a foundation of child and family team meetings, and child and family team meetings borrows from a lot of WRAP philosophy and builds upon WRAP philosophy. So I think that there are some what feel like similarities, but we, at least in San Diego, don't necessarily view child and family teams as a service. It's just a way to have discussion about services that are being rendered.
This is Amanda from San Diego, and our wraparound programs are providing ICC for youth that are eligible for enhanced services through, the KDA initiative, the Pathways to Wellbeing in our county, and they do delineate between their typical wraparound meetings and the child and family team meeting. So they are using those specific billing codes, and also the social worker has to be present, which the social worker is not always present for wraparound meetings. And a lot of times the focus shifts a bit for the child and family team meetings versus what they're discussing in either weekly or biweekly wraparound meetings.
Yeah, this is Tim Zavala from Tulare, and I agree with you guys completely. Wraparound is a service, just like therapeutic behavioral services is a service. And so it's just, they can be coordinated. We can have an IHBS worker going out to the home. In fact, we have a client right now that we just started working with. We're going to be providing 3 rehab services in the home during the week, and then TBS is going to be coming out on the weekends and providing additional services, so that it could be a wraparound provider just the same. So I think that all of the services have a place.
All right, thank you. The next question is, as a behavioral health provider, if your workload is already full with seeing your existing clients, how do you integrate in CFTs? How much time do you budget for the first and subsequent CFTs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know, I've had lots of therapists on my staff that will sigh, big sighs, when they know that they have to coordinate these meetings and attend these meetings, but they see the importance of it, obviously, and they just will schedule it in. I mean, we know that we have to do it once we get a client into the program within 2 weeks. That's plenty of time for them to put it on their schedule or adjust their schedule if necessary. And then that really important component of the CFT, which is setting the next one. Is it going to be 30 days? Is it going to be 60 days? And then they're able to schedule it in. So it just becomes part of their schedule, and they bill for it, and it hasn't really been a problem.
And in San Diego,
this is Sandra from Tulare. I do want to add that our clinicians prioritize. I mean, if we have a kiddo that's coming in and there is a need, the clinicians prioritize, and we schedule those CFTs as soon as possible. And then as we get moving with our service and they're meeting with those clients, they will find a way. If, for example, if they have a individual appointment to meet with that client, they can turn that into a CFT meeting because they're still meeting with the client, they're still providing a service. So that's a way to kind of play around with your schedule. If you're really that busy, maybe one of your appointments can be that CFT meeting.
And this is San Diego County, and we acknowledge that a lot of what we're asking our providers to do is extra workload, especially with the child and family team facilitation. And so we've been working carefully, outreaching it and trying to streamline it a little bit. We have lots of different models going on out there. Some of our programs have decided to designate care coordinators who are facilitating meetings and have a smaller caseload and handed over some of their caseload to other clinicians. Some of them are swapping. They're doing child and family team meetings for other clinicians' caseloads and vice versa. So that way they're not actually facilitating their own kids therapy CFT meetings, because there were some concerns around conflict, which makes sense as well. But it is more work. But ultimately, especially in those starting phases, but once that team gets formed, that's where some of the handoff happens, where it's not just the clinician working to try to navigate how all these needs are going to get met, but the rest of the team is there to support too, and hopefully the social worker is playing a pretty key role in pulling that team and maintaining that team cohesiveness as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just another thing is that as an administrator, I've decided that my therapist should only have a small handful of these clients because of the extra workload. So I don't have anybody that has all KDA kids. They only have 2 or 3, and then the rest of their caseload is a quote-unquote normal caseload.
All right, great, thank you. The next question is, to what degree are some participants on the phone and in person, and what is ideal?
Yeah, we don't do any on the phone. At this point, we just make sure that everybody's there.
So we, of course, always prefer in person. A lot of child and family teams, it's so relationship-based, and there's so much about building relationships in person, and it's very difficult to do so on the phone. However, what we notice is a lot of times phone is the link between the child welfare worker or a youth having a natural support there. So we obviously accept that sometimes being on the phone helps us to get the key players to the meeting, and we certainly wouldn't want to delay a meeting because because that communication or connecting with that person is a barrier. So to the extent that phone allows us to have meetings and have the right people there, we certainly invite that, but obviously always having folks in person is always the preferred way to do things.
And the next question is, how do you continue with fidelity to the CFT structure, especially if you have a child or consumer with a diagnosis that can actually regress behaviorally if he is present for the entire CFT meeting? Has anyone run into this problem?
This is Stephen. I think I would need to understand sort of what was it about the meeting that led to the difficulties for the youth. I think if it's a sort of a mental health related issue, like if there's any psychotic symptoms or attention issues that are sort of clinically complicating in that meeting, I think that to me that is treated much like a developmental limitation that maybe a younger child might have. So the team needs to understand kind of what are the capacities of the youth to participate and make sure that the youth participates in what is sort of the most important part of the meeting where their voice is necessary, and to incorporate that, but just to also understand the limitations of the youth from a time or stimulation standpoint. However, if the format of the meeting in terms of sort of the engagement aspect of the meeting are what's causing kind of upset or difficulties with attending, then I think that's the team's responsibility to try to make that meeting as comfortable as possible so that there aren't any sort of engagement triggers that go on during the meeting that cause them to leave. So I think I would have to understand what the trigger would be.
Right. This is Amanda, and I actually absolutely mirror Stephen's opinion. I think that a lot of it also has to do with the preparation phase, where the youth should really know what's going to happen while they're there, about how long that's going to take, and what to expect, because I would wonder if there were some loopholes where they got into the meeting and then information was discussed that the youth wasn't prepared to hear, and then that caused the regression. So of course that goes back to sort of the importance of preparation as well.
All right, the next question is, Stephen mentioned that CFTs are different from a TDM. Can you say a little bit more about what the main differences are?
So I think the differences, and I'll speak specifically for San Diego, I'm not sure how TDMs are practiced in other counties, but in San Diego, a very typical part of the introduction and team decision-making meetings are, we're glad you're here, we're glad to have family here and have their input. We're here to make a very specific decision about placement, and that we're hoping for consensus based on everybody's input. However, if for some reason we reach an impasse or that there is or that we're not able to reach a full kind of conclusion or decision, that because it's an agency-driven meeting, that the responsibility of making the decision is vested with the agency. So I think that the idea and the premise that it's an agency-called meeting and that in times of disagreement, the agency makes the decision, I think is really the key component that differs from child and family teams. The child and family teams are not an agency-called meeting or an agency-centric meeting. They're a youth and family-centric meeting, and that the idea of kind of defaulting to agency decision-making is not a part of the child and family team meeting. That even if there is disagreement or difficulty with consensus, that the decision about what happens in the child and family team meeting still rests with the team, and particularly the youth and the family.
All right, the next question is are your hope and vision statements, do they pertain specifically to what the child and family or youth want to accomplish at each specific meeting, and or what they want to achieve long term? So how do you use both vision statements?
This is Sandra from Tulare County. Yeah, it can go either way. It's when I do the meetings, we review whether it's a long term or it's a short term, and it depends. Sometimes when we meet again in the 90 days or the 2 months or the 60 days, the 30 days, that change, and that's okay. It's whatever the family needs in the moment and whatever the child needs in the moment. So it's okay to change it. So it could be both ways.
The next question is, what challenges have you encountered with information sharing in team meetings? For example, what gets shared and what the team members do with that, i.e. does the info get into the court reports? What are typical agreements you make around info sharing and confidentiality?
So at this point, our practice, and this is a kind of an evolving conversation, because I think that is a reality of sort of the CWS side of case management, but at this point we are not attaching child welfare documents to court reports. It's actually similar for TDMs in our county. That they don't make it as attachments. However, the information may be summarized in a court report, or just kind of the results of the meeting, or kind of what the plan or the vision is, may be summarized in court reports in the body of the court report, but we're at this point not attaching any of the CFT-related documentation to reports.
And some of our facilitators and our team members have asked questions just about the level of confidentiality, and the training that we're doing really addresses that the meeting is considered private, but it's not completely confidential because of the nature of the external natural supports that we've invited in, et cetera. However, that does also require some preparation and planning in terms of the information that's being disclosed in the meeting as well.
Right, and then this is Tim and Tulare. The only thing I would add is that we just ensure, of course, that we have releases of information for all parties that are attending, and that everybody understands it is it's confidential. You know, everybody understands what their role is and what information is going to be taken out of there to help the client and the family achieve their goals. But essentially, you know, it's a confidential meeting.
And then I had several questions that are all in the same vein of, in your county, who facilitates the CFT meetings for the initial or non-subclass meetings? Is it the facilitation coordinated through mental health or child welfare services?
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. Is it, I mean, we do it. We do the initial where we're explaining the services. And then the individuals get to choose whether or not they accept the services. So I think that's the answer to the question. We do that here at Mental Health.
And in San Diego County, I think the question was in regards to non-subclass or what we would call pathway services. So in our county, whenever there is an identified mental health need, the youth has teaming and kind of this child and family team process available to them. So in our county, when we screen youth, when they come into foster care, if they do have an identified mental health need, that screening is done by a child welfare staff. and that child welfare staff, if they see that there's an identified mental health need through that mental health screening, they are the ones that are responsible for the teaming and the initial facilitation. In our county, if a youth is served by a county contracted mental health provider, that mental health provider would assume the care coordination if the youth is found to be eventually in need of enhanced services, but that would just that would need to be decided once a formal mental health assessment has been done to make sure that to do the eligibility determination based on the subclass criteria.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
All right. Do both San Diego and Tulare mandate an initial CFT meeting 2 weeks after the client is first identified as KDA eligible? How do they manage holding the first meetings after their first group was identified?
This is San Diego County, and no, we don't mandate that there's an initial CFT meeting within 2 weeks. We stick to actually that 90 days. However, there are some circumstances and some programs that are doing it within 30 days, which really is more optimal, especially with these kids who are really high risk. And I would say even that 30 to 45 days, if they are pulling that team together, it's still a challenge to figure out exactly who's going to be there, but it is a work in progress, and the team is active and alive, and it's growing as that meeting is happening. So that second meeting will probably look somewhat different from the initial CFT meeting as well.
Great, thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for your questions, and once again to thank our presenters, Amanda, Sarah, and Steve from San Diego, and Tim, Milia, and Sandra from Tulare for really good presentations and really informative. It's just really helpful to hear how you're doing things, and I think it's really helpful for counties to learn from one another. We do have a couple of webinars coming up in April and May, and then we're going to focus on small county implementation, which can look very different, this type of work in a small county than a medium or larger county. And there's also two links on your screen right now. These are in the slides that show recordings of the webinars and also some other resources that are on the CIVHS website. So once again, we encourage you to take a few minutes to share your feedback with us as you exit the session. And with that, we conclude our broadcast, and thank you so very much for joining us today, and have a great day and a great week.